Hey there, it's Gary Parrish. Welcome back to the CBS Sports Eye on College Basketball podcast, where we sometimes discuss camel fighting, dodo birds, and leaky black. If you watch it on YouTube, you know what to do to that like button. Shouts to Brandon Davies. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube channel, please also do that while you're here. Let's get into it. Today we are launching our Summer Shootaround series that we're going to be doing over a span of a few weeks. As you might have heard, we're going to do things a little differently this offseason. We're going to do episodes on most of the schools inside the top 10 of the top 25 and 1, and episodes on a few prominent programs outside of the top 10 of the top 25 and 1. And then we're also going to auction off 3 episodes to the highest bidders, like we've done in previous years, with all proceeds from those episodes going to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in my hometown of Memphis, Tennessee. So that's that. Here's the twist. We're going to mix up the lineup for these shows. Sometimes it's going to be me and Matt and Orlando. You're used to that. But other times it's going to be me and the coach of the team we're discussing, or me and some other analyst / columnist, or me and some local person with interesting insight into the program, or Norlander and a fresh voice that we're excited to bring in. Hopefully it's going to be a good time. I trust that it will be. So consider that your setup for this Summer Shoot-Around series. And the first program we're going to focus on is St. John's, because that's the team I have ranked right now number 1 in the top 25 and 1. And the person who's going to help me talk about Rick Pitino's Red Storm is my friend John Fanta, who, of course, calls college basketball games for Fox Sports, NBC Sports, also provides commentary for our buddies over at the Field of 68. Yes, the great John Fanta. He's going to join me momentarily. First, though, let's get a word from our partners.
Here we go. The 2025 CBS Sports NFL schedule is here. 18 glorious Sundays.
He's got his receiver, touchdown!
Filled with rematches.
Oh, the play of the year!
And rivalries.
Touchdown, Bengals!
Plus, plenty of superstar showdowns. And an epic matchup between the Chiefs and Cowboys on Thanksgiving. Clear your Sundays beginning September 7th for the NFL on CBS and Paramount Plus.
As promised, John Fanta is now with me. Fanta, it's GP. Great to see you at Peach Jam earlier this month. I appreciate you being here with me today. How's summer been treating you? How's the family?
GP, everything is great, and it is awesome to be on the wonderful Eye on College Basketball podcast, which is just fantastic. Loyal listener here. I appreciate you guys thinking of me for this, and family's doing well. I'm a new dad. Andrew was born on May the 7th, so my wife, Vicky, and I, as you know, first kid, we're jumping into it. As we're talking, we're 11 weeks in, and I'm learning something new every day. And I'm just telling people it's like a championship week, first week of the tournament sleep schedule on steroids, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
It is. I remember being a young first-time father like yourself, and I tell you, you're going to run through all of these moments where you feel overwhelmed, inadequate, like you don't know what you're doing. And just understand, none of us really knew what we were doing, and probably still don't know what we're doing. But somehow, some way, you get through it. I will tell you, you have quickly become my wife's favorite college basketball analyst. She looks at your family pictures, and she's like, he's always looks so happy, and his wife is so happy, and they got the beautiful baby. So you've got fans in the Parrish household in every corner of it.
Well, that means a lot. Hope you and Kelly and the family are doing well. And I'll tell you what, that really means a lot. Because at the end of the day, Gary, why do you and Matt do this? Of course, for CBS. And why do I do the things that we get to do? We love our audience. We love our fans. And you know what? It's actually a perfect segue to the episode that we're actually talking about. Because I think you would agree that there was always a place for St. John's University at the big boy table, even after years of being irrelevant, off the map, and flat out poor at times, missing on hires. But I don't even think that Rick Pitino thought that in 2 years he would have Madison Square Garden going sellout after sellout, 5-6 straight Saturdays at MSG this past winter. It was refreshing, and it is refreshing to see.
It was my favorite story of the 2024-25 college basketball season, the reemergence of St. John's. As you know, I live in the South, but in the winters, I'm in New York City more than I'm down here. And so I got to feel that, walking around Midtown Manhattan, like it mattered in a way that it had not mattered in a long time. And, as you know, I'm quite a bit older than you, but my introduction to college basketball, in part because of where I lived, was like that 1984-85 season. That's the one I remember the best, the earliest. And it's in part because it's the year my alma mater went to the Final Four, Memphis State at the time, but was joined there by 3 Big East programs, including St. John's. Like I grew up on Chris Mullin and St. John's and Patrick Ewing and John Thompson. And obviously Georgetown has got to find its way back to the forefront of the sport somehow, some way. But absolutely watching Rick turn St. John's back into what clearly St. John's is capable of being, and really grabbing New York City in a way that it hadn't happened in a while. It was tremendous. For people who maybe didn't follow it so closely, let me run through some bullet points here with the Red Storm, and then we'll continue the conversation. So after decades of just being an afterthought in the national level of college basketball, they go 31-5 last season, 18-2 in the Big East. They win the conference championship outright. Then they beat Butler, Marquette, and Creighton at the Garden to win the Big East tournament. Got a 2 seed on Selection Sunday in the NCAA tournament. Beat Omaha, and then that's the last good thing that happened, because after that, upset by Arkansas in the second round of the tournament. Now, basically everybody from that team is gone other than Zuby Ejifor, but Rick Pitino cleaned up in the transfer portal and added, most notably, Ian Jackson from North Carolina, Isaiah Sellers from Stanford, Josan Sannon from Arizona State, and Bryce Hopkins from Providence. The strength of that class is why I have St. John's ranked number 1 in my top 25 and 1. So, Fanta, please tell folks where you have St. John's ranked in this offseason and how good you think this remade roster can actually be.
I have them ranked 4th,
okay.
And I think that however your top 3 is, my top 3 happens to be Purdue, Florida, Houston. St. John's then is 4th. UConn actually would be 5th, which makes that rivalry that much more special and extraordinary, and the coaching personality. So there's so much to unpack. What do I think they could be? I think they could be a Final Four team. I think they could be a national championship caliber team, and here's why. When you load up in the transfer portal like they did, Gary, they've got the money piece down with Mike Rapoli, who was the founder of Vitamin Water, and has just bankrolled this St. John's program. And Rapoli's essentially bankrolling Pitino, ensuring that Pitino would he's not going to go anywhere, but just making sure of that in every single way. Well, what does that mean? It means that when you're recruiting in the portal and Isaiah Sellers is not asking, well, how many shots is Joe Sannon going to get up from Arizona State? It means that Ian Jackson's not asking questions about Dylan Darling coming in, who I think Dylan Darling is going to be the X factor to this recruiting class, because I think he ultimately ends up being the point guard for this team. And that's a guy who was the Big Sky Player of the Year, averaged 19 points per game. I know it was at Idaho State, but I trust Rick to be able to develop him. I think that that's the key. You still have to deal, a lot of programs still have to deal, one, they have to deal with what their money situation is. St. John's money's not an object. Number 2, when money's not an object, you then allow yourself with the right coach and the right talker, and Rick Pitino can win in any room. I mean, that's one thing he can do. He can win over any room. Just watch him in any press conference setting, watch him in any interview. He's got that New York charm. He's got that style, and it resonates. It means that if one of these or 2 of these kids doesn't work out, St. John's isn't screwed. That's why you have them number 1, because Bryce Hopkins at his best was in the Big East Player of the Year mix. Yeah. Zuby Ejifor at his best could be in the Big East Player of the Year mix, could be in, really, I think they expect him to be an All-American. You just need 2 or 3 of these guards, and you got what feels like an infinite amount out of the portal to pan out. They have an embarrassment of riches. They have a coach who I would put up there with anybody in the nation, even though he's 72. He's like a 41-year-old in a 72-year-old's body. And they have the makeup, the length, the athleticism that really, and I mean this, part candidly, but part in a complimentary way, they have an SEC-like roster. Mm-hmm. And in the Big East now, you could say that about Connecticut. I trust Greg McDermott enough, but after that, there's a clear cutoff from a standpoint of on-paper talent. I trust the on-paper talent. I trust the coach. And now the dimension is I trust that they'll get enough wins in New York that even if they hit a wall against a hard schedule, their schedule's hard, I'm sure we'll get to it, they're still going to be in a place where they arrive to March Madness and they've seen it all.
You more or less summarized why I have them at the top of the top 25 and one. They have an embarrassment of riches, and I believe the best college basketball roster in the country. It doesn't mean they'll produce more NBA draft picks than anybody in the country. It just means that if I were trying to build a college basketball team, I would want this roster over any other roster. And then the coach speaks for itself. Like Rick Pitino is one of the greatest college basketball coaches of all time, still one of the greatest college basketball coaches working today. And again, in possession right now of what I would consider the best roster in the country. Just to run through it on some of the names you mentioned, like you said, Zuby Ejifor was first team All Big East last season. Bryce Hopkins was that the last time he was healthy. Ian Jackson is a former top 10 recruit. Joe Santa is a former 5-star recruit. Osiah Sellers is a senior who just averaged 13.7 points at an ACC school last season. And then that would just be a possible projected starting lineup. But if it were that, you've got Dylan Mitchell, another former 5-star recruit who's averaged double figures at the power conference level, coming off your bench. And then Dylan Darling is a conference player of the year who, and I think you touched on something interesting there, could end up really being a key factor for this team, because I know publicly it is like, we're going to put the ball in Ian Jackson's hands. He's our point guard. And I don't doubt they'll start that way and try it. And it might go perfectly. But if it doesn't, you've got a traditional, true point guard that you can use to get you into your offense and maybe free up Ian Jackson to do what he does best, which is don't worry about all this other stuff. Just go score basketballs.
Well, and remember this with St. John's this past year. They won 31 games. They played an easier non-conference schedule. You know, this upcoming year, where you've got to play Alabama at the Garden. I credit them for scheduling this way. Ole Miss, Kentucky in the CBS in a CBS event that's going to be down in Atlanta. Can't wait for that. That's at State Farm Arena. That's going to be a huge game between Mark Pope and Rick Pitino. You've got those three. You've got the Players Era Festival as well. So you have Iowa State, you have Baylor. Like, there's no rest for the weary. That schedule is going to be an absolute gauntlet. You're going to play 3 high majors, and you got another 3, and all 3 of them are SEC schools. But remember this past year they won 31 games. Kadari Richmond was terrible through the first 2 months of the season. If you flip the page to January this past year, you would have been saying, man, did he actually make a mistake transferring to St. John's? He was non-existent, GP. They were relying, really, everything was on Davon Smith to get it done. Then when Smith had an injury was when Richmond started to take off and they figured some things out about themselves. But that's just it. I do think there's a world where in November, Ian Jackson is struggling. And everybody's going to proclaim this isn't working or it's done or it's easy to do. Remember here, it's a marathon. Rick has a method to his madness. And with some of these kids, he's trying to prove a point. Guess what? You're allowed to, as a coach, prove a point when that biweekly paycheck says what it says. It's a big difference at St. John's and at the top echelon of NIL programs than at other programs where that might go south. So I think that's the reason why. Your reason's well taken of like Jackson, they'll start there with him. I don't deny that. But in the event that it doesn't work, sometimes, GP, your transition from mid-major or low-major league to high-major program is dependent on the other talent that surrounds you, not just your game. So Dylan Darling might find out something about him, and he might find out something about himself that he didn't even realize because he was in the Big Sky. And now you're at St. John's and you're on an all-star team. So that to me is really intriguing. I also think you can manufacture guards in the portal to me. It's a guards game. There's plenty of guards. If I still want a stable force, I actually might be contrarian in this belief. And if you disagree with me, I'd love the debate. I think I've seen more coaches miss on front court players than just flat out miss altogether on guards, because I think you can find an alternative plan. Because Ejifor's that rock inside, that makes me feel all safe inside with St. John's. I know that they're covered on the interior, which any Pitino team is going to rebound and defend.
Well, like, just on the subject of the guards being easier to find and more translatable. I remember having a conversation with Jay Wright years ago, and people would always be like, so when you were at this place, you played small lineups, and at this place you might play 4 guards. And he was like, because they're easier to find. It's much harder to go out and find 7'2" rim protectors, and there's only so many of them, and they tend to go to places like Kentucky and Duke and North Carolina. So you're trying to find the best players you can find, the most talent, and you can find the guards are easier to find than the bigs. So perhaps that's an explanation for that.
And ask Connecticut about that.
Yeah.
Because they had Adama Sanogo and Donovan Clingan, and they had Samson Johnson and Donovan Clingan. But then this past year it was Samson Johnson and Terrace Reed, and now Terrace is back. But, you could go right down the line. Like, Jay Wright lost in the Chris Jenkins buzzer beater in 2016. Daniel Shefu held it down in the paint for that team. You have to still have a stable big man in college basketball in a sport where we both love it, but let's face it, in a sport where there could be a game where you shoot 3 of 21 from 3, who is down there outwilling the other team on the interior? They have no question marks in their front court. The only question is if Bryce Hopkins can stay fully healthy for the full duration of the season.
So I want to ask you about Hopkins in just a second, because I read some interesting quotes from him the other day, but I want to circle back to Ian Jackson real quick. He's obviously from New York. Like, he grew up there, and now he's back there. Where I'm from, down here, that always mattered. Like, Memphians who played for the Tigers was a big deal. Penny Hardaway's from here. Elliot Perry from here. Does that matter at all in New York City, or is it just too big of a place that doesn't matter? You tell me.
It matters if the coach embraces it.
There you go.
Like, I for the life of me, I couldn't figure out, and I really started covering college basketball on an everyday basis around 2017. I did my undergrad at Seton Hall, so I'm not originally from the metropolitan area. But, for the life of me, I couldn't figure out, how is St. John's this bad at that time? Like, obviously they had messed up on some of the hires, but then, Peach Jam, you get this type of info, grassroots basketball. Gary, you start to hear about coaches. Now, Chris Mullen, he had some relationships, but it's not like he was working 24/7. We both know that. But then you hire Mike Anderson, and let's face it, he didn't have ties to New York City. And so all of those connections and relationships just kind of sever. Rick Pitino makes a non-New Yorker want to be a New Yorker because he has that type of effect. It matters if you wanted to, which at St. John's, why wouldn't you want it to? They don't play their home games at another metropolitan building. They play their home games at the building in New York City. They now have that building reaching out to them to see if certain dates and times work. Not the building saying, hey, wait on the Knicks and the Rangers, and then you can get back to us and we'll figure something out. We'll figure 4 or 5 dates out. They're going to play at least 12 times at the Garden this year. That hasn't happened for St. John's basketball in a long, long time. So Ian Jackson, to me, he was going to get a bag in year 2 wherever he was. Right. St. John's makes him a good offer, but Rick Pitino says, listen, Ian, you're a Bronx kid. You're a New Yorker. You've got that type of game. Do you want to be part of something? And you can't tell me. Look at the scene when they won the Big East regular season, their first outright Big East regular season title since 1985. The game was televised on CBS. They hosted Seton Hall, and the scene at the end of the game was wild. It was something out of the 1980s. It was something on the 1990s. And it's like when people say with the Knicks, it doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't move the needle. People don't want to really play. I think Jalen Brunson's made it matter again. I think Josh Hart's made it matter again to a degree. I think that, Karl Anthony Towns made it really cool to be a New Jersey guy playing in New York City. It matters if you make it a point of emphasis, not if you just let it be a messaging point and you don't actually act on it. It was, for a while, St. John's was this restaurant that you went to in your childhood, GP, and you loved. Then you go away for a long time. And you're back home for the holidays. You walk in and you have the same burger that you grew up loving. And you're like, what happened? This doesn't taste the same. And they say, yeah, we've changed hands a couple of times and we've changed the manufacturer of that. Well, that's not why you fell in love with the place. Rick Pitino came in and did a Gordon Ramsay, or a Restaurant Impossible, and said, clean all the crap out. What was working in 1985? Well, college basketball doesn't work that way anymore. Sure, money can make anything work that you want it, the way you want it to. And whether the non-St. John's people, the people that don't like St. John's, are scoffing and angry that they've fallen into this, but they didn't fall into it. Brian Shanley, this is a deep cut where this podcast can cover something that maybe another pod can't. St. John's doesn't get to this point without hiring a guy from Providence who gets basketball. Father Brian Shanley's now the president there. He told Rick Pitino, do what you have to do to get this program on the winning track again. Ian Jackson wants to be part of that. He wants to be Kadari Richmond. He wants to be R.J. Lewis. He wants to be Davon Smith. What does Jackson have in common with a guy like a Richmond? They're New Yorkers. All the New York kids, GP, you've been covering grassroots long enough. They all talk to each other. Yes. They're all boys. Oh, the Archbishop Stepanak kid. Oh, there's my boy from Don Bosco. There's my boy from Our Savior Lutheran. They're all tied in together. They all talk. Jackson talked to his New York kids who had played there and said, what do you think? They said, there's going to be nothing better than this, and you're going to get coached the right way, and you're going to make money while doing it. So I think for Ian, I think you're going to see Ian start in this one role. I don't know if he finishes there. Here's what I do know. Nobody's going to set him up to average 15 to 20 points per game better than Pitino and his staff. By the time January, February, March roll around, I think he has a chance to become one of the best scoring guards in college basketball. Remember, he had a 7-game stretch in his freshman year in a system that frankly has its flaws and challenges at North Carolina, where as a freshman, he's averaging 19 points per game over a 7 or 8 game stretch.
When things are down, to circle back to one of your earlier points, it's very easy, particularly when they're down for an extended period of time, to reach a point where you think or assume, well, it just doesn't matter the way it used to matter, or it can't move the needle the way it used to move the needle. But we saw it at 2 different levels in New York City this year. St. John's was moving the needle again and mattering as much as it's ever mattered. And the Knicks were moving the needle again and mattering more than they've mattered in a long time, as much as they've ever mattered. And how did that happen? Just success. You put winning stuff on, you put a winning product out there. And what we learned over the past year in New York City, they will care deeply about college basketball and deeply about professional basketball.
Or baseball in April.
There you go.
It was 50 degrees in Flushing. And I'm watching the Mets on SNY, and their stadium is full in the early springtime.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I expect this in June, July, August on a weekend for the most part, and then some weeknights when a marquee team is in, not this early in the season. And that if New Yorkers are smart, you can't just lie to them. They'll read right through a lie. They will. Whereas down in the SEC and down the ACC and down in college towns, right? You're still going to get people that are interested because it's a social activity.
Sure.
In New York, if the program has a losing mentality and they bring in a UConn and UConn has more fans at the game than them, why as a fan am I buying season tickets for the rest of the season when I can scout for $8 if it's actually interesting, if that? So you can't lie. And that's just it with Pitino is in basketball. You could feel, everybody's got a different thought process with Pitino and his career and whatnot. Pitino, the basketball coach, is right in the conversation for Mount Rushmore. And now him at St. John's in this Godfather type of role with 885 wins. And it does get me thinking, GP. The thought crossed my mind for the first time this year, right? I'm sorry to spring off, but I have to get your thought on this. Like, he's going to pass 900, and, there's the vacated thing, but, like, this guy's wired. You cannot tell me. Because he's not slowing down, that he doesn't give an inkling of a thought to saying, well, if I go 4 or 5 more years and I still have my mind and I'm at 77 or 78 and I get, my 1000th win as a coach, like that's in that very small sliver. You can't tell me he doesn't give thought to it.
Oh, I could see him caring about that. I think more than that, you know what he cares about? Just working. He likes to work. He likes to be in the gym. I remember talking to him on the phone when he was out in that period of time where he was just like trying to fill up the days with something other than basketball because basketball wasn't there anymore. And I don't want to speak for Rick, but he was bored. And I remember him saying something along these lines. I assume people assume about me that what I really miss is like walking in and, expensive suits and being on TV. He's like, that's really not what I miss. I miss individual workouts. I just want to get in. And that's how he ends up coaching in Greece and at Iona. There are men like that who they want to be it. Larry Brown is wired that way. Jim Calhoun was wired that way. And so I could see him coaching for several more years for 2 reasons. One, you touched on earlier. Yeah, he's 72, turned 73, I believe, in September. He doesn't sound it. He doesn't look it really. When you listen to Rick talk or talk with Rick, you don't feel like you're talking to somebody who is 72 years old. Maybe that's the simplest way to put it, but it's also, I think, the best way to put it. I don't feel like I'm talking to an old man. When I watch him work, I don't feel like I'm watching an old man work. So I think he's got good years left, or at least I certainly hope he has good years left. And beyond that, I think he's going to work as long as he can. The day Rick Pitino stops coaching college basketball will be the day where he doesn't feel like he can do it anymore.
Yeah, where the health is but
that's right.
No, there's nothing. The guy gets up, for those who don't know, he's up at 4:30 in the morning. He heads to Equinox. He does a full workout. He goes back home. He'll pick up some items, some groceries, some things for his wife, Joanne. He takes their dog out, and he walks the dog 2 more miles. He's already gone through an hour-long workout from 4:30 to 5:30. Gary, he's joked with me. He's right. He's like, I've accomplished more at 9 a.m. than sometimes you do in a day. And he's absolutely correct. This guy's walked 2 miles, done a full workout, then goes to campus. You bring up the individual workouts. You know this. Mm-hmm. He's working these kids out for 2 hours before practice. Mm. Then, they're going to class. He'll watch a little bit of film. Then we've got an afternoon practice. And it's not until then that he actually sits down and says, you know what, I need to probably eat something today. He only eats 1 meal a day. That guy's been intermittent fasting for like 50 years. So he's in rarefied. Yeah. He's in a special class. This is a guy who, the way St. John's schedule worked out, they had some off time around Christmas. But the team came back on Christmas Day. They practiced. Not that other teams don't. They practice. And then he said to his assistants, all right, let's go watch some film. And, Steve Masiello said, Coach, I would love to watch film. I love you. I'd watch film with you any other day, but it is Christmas. I do have to be Santa for my kids for, I have to go and be with my kids on Christmas Day. So, I mean, that's the art of Rick Pitino.
I love that he's gotten St. John's mattering again in New York City, connecting with New Yorkers. And I love, just to put a bow on this part of it, the idea that a New Yorker like Ian Jackson could be the face of it in some ways in this upcoming season. I told you I wanted to ask you about Hopkins. Here's the question. What do we expect? The last time we saw him healthy, he was one of the best college basketball players in the country. But then he tore the ACL, tried to come back last season and just wasn't right, was able to preserve the year of eligibility, which was smart because it allowed for another payday. So he's got that now. I read a quote from him over the past week or so where he said, I kind of feel better than ever, but, we'll see. What do you expect from Bryce Hopkins this season?
I don't think that that I have a firm grasp on, like, okay, like, it's easy. The easy answer is, well, Gary, if he's at his best, he's going to average 16 and 8. But it's also not how St. John's is from a perspective of this team could have 5 or 6 guys, and there's been successful teams like this, and then one emerges around January or February. Maybe that's Jackson. Maybe that ends up being Jackson. The thing about Bryce is he's not a particularly strong three-point shooter. He's never shown us that he can consistently knock down the perimeter shots and pull up off the dribble. He's going to get open looks for this team because, again, they have an embarrassment of riches. If you look at his track record, he shot 19% from 3 in 2023-24. He did shoot 36% in 22-23. That was probably the best sample size that we have. But, he also was a 31% shooter the year before that. It's been a mixed bag from the perimeter. That's a very undefined area. And the fact is, Rick wants to play a style that sees dribble penetration into potential threes. And last year, that was St. John's bugaboo. They could not make three-point shots. I wonder, will Bryce and St. John's, will Bryce and Rick Pitino be a full match from a conditioning standpoint? Because Hopkins was in a system with Ed Cooley where he could back you down, play some junkyard dog basketball, play in the Al Skinner flex. That's not this style. My honest expectations are he's going to be a double-figure scorer and a guy who has 7 to 9 rebounds per game. Double figure could be 12 points. Double figure could be he has 4 or 5 20-point games. Do I expect him to be in the mix as one of the best 4 or 5 players in the Big East? By virtue of St. John's roster construction, I'm actually gonna say I don't think so because of the conditioning piece, how much is required to flourish from a statistical standpoint when you're coming off this. And I know that he's well beyond his recovery, but GP, when you haven't played in college games in multiple years, I would be a little bit surprised if he just comes out and dominates. I think you're going to see a taste of it. I think you're going to see him maybe against Quinnipiac early in the year or against another Iona. They're going to play Iona. Like, I could see him. He needs those games because it's going to be hard when they show up to Players Era and you're playing 3 games as many days. That's totally new for Bryce Hopkins. That's going to be a totally different level for him. So I think he'll be a solid asset for this team. Do I think he's their best player or their second best player? I actually don't, because I'm going to vote Jackson and Ejifor. That's kind of where I stand on him heading into this season. I'm tempering my exact expectations for him, just because I think it's a little bit out of bounds for a guy that's been missing from the court for this long to just expect plug and play. If he's that damn good, man, then St. John's could run away with things.
Last thing before I get you out of here, and I appreciate your time. We both think St. John's is going to be really good. We both have them in our top 4. But if it doesn't go well, if it doesn't meet expectations, what would be the main reason? Is it a lack of continuity in the roster from one season to the next? Is it the lack of a proven point guard at the high major level? Is it that Ian Jackson isn't somebody who actually needs to be your lead guard? If it doesn't work, what's the reason?
That they never find a point guard, and that their perimeter defense isn't good enough. So for me, when you look at an Ian Jackson, do I think he's going to be able to defend? Yeah. Like, do I think this St. John's team can win the national championship? Absolutely. When I say my answer about Hopkins, I think there might be some St. John's fans who are like, this is confusing, or it's more about like, I still think they're that good of a basketball team, and that's the beauty of it. They don't need him to be this. There's a couple of teams that need a certain guy to be that good, and sometimes those teams end up winning at a very high level of games because that guy is that special. I think for St. John's, you have this point guard scenario that, like a quarterback training camp scenario, is real. We don't know on November 3rd who their starting point guard is going to be. We think it's probably going to be Ian Jackson, but what's that going to look like, Gary? And is there a world where Ian Jackson, you're asking me, how does this not work out? I just don't want him to lose his confidence. I don't want him to be broken at all. I want him to be a scoring combo guard who can handle it at a high level and be fantastic if I'm a St. John's fan and if I'm Rick Pitino. Like, I thought Richmond was broken the first 2 months of last year. Then he found it. But he actually found it because of an injury. You know, nobody wants to admit it, but that's the truth. Davon Smith going out for a little while kept Richmond from looking over his shoulder. Pitino is a mad scientist. He loves depth. Dylan Mitchell should be the defensive stopper for this team. So I can't see Dylan Mitchell not succeeding for Rick Pitino. It feels like a match made in heaven for a role guy, whether he's a sixth man or however they manage the rotation. I just think it's a matter of like Joe Sannon, Oziah Sellers, and Dylan Darling. Are you hitting on two of those three? Are you hitting on all three? Are you just hitting on one? Make no mistake, like they crushed it in the portal. It's actually math. Maybe I'm wrong for saying this, but I will say this. It's mathematically impossible for every transfer to be a grand slam because there's only so many minutes to go around and there's only one basketball. So it's just navigating role allocation, and it would just be a matter of point guard play. Some of these guys that come from programs that did not make the tournament last year, and you want to make sure that they can play your brand of basketball. Like for a guy like Joe Sannon, let's face it, this isn't Arizona State anymore. Right. This is a different monster. And the same can be said for a transfer from Stanford and Oziah Sellers. And then the other thing would just be Zuby Ejifor ensuring that he stays healthy. Because if he were to have any issues, like they're counting on him being that guy for 30 plus minutes per game, around that, because he's come back to be that type of dude. That's the only way that St. John's doesn't get to the places they want to get to. And I think what's interesting is this team to me won't go 31-5, but that's not what this season about. This season is about getting to Indianapolis. This season is about getting to the second weekend at worst in the NCAA tournament. They're going to have to navigate that when they have a rough patch in the season, because I could see that because their schedule's really hard. But they also have to remember you got to play November, December, January, February before you get to that tournament, and you can't have too much. They're going to have a bit of a burden, this team, when they get to that second tournament game, Gary, of let's get the monkey off our back. Because remember, when they enter the tournament next year, it will have been 26 years since St. John's made the second weekend.
That is one of the wilder facts connected to college basketball. There used to be one about how long it had been since Arkansas had made the Sweet 16. Musselman was able to end that one. And so we'll see if Rick can do the same thing at St. John's. I imagine, you know what, I'll bet that he probably will. John Fanta, you were terrific, brother. I appreciate your time. You got me fired up for the season. I know we still got a few months, but you got me ready for it tomorrow, I think. So thank you for being here. Tell your family I said hello, and if I can ever repay the favor, let me know.
And anytime, GP. Putting St. John's first means there are New Yorkers who I think are lining up to take you to a spaghetti dinner of some sort in New York City. Move over, Rothstein.
I enjoy spaghetti. I enjoy dinners in New York City. I'll take anybody up on any offer. Shouts to Devin Downey. Shouts to Chester, South Carolina. Shouts to Terry Teagle. He's a legend. Huck Larnell. Thank all you guys once again for watching, listening to Eye on College Basketball Podcast. If you're not subscribed, please go subscribe anywhere you subscribe to podcasts, Apple, Spotify. There's more of us than there are of them. That should be reflected in the comments. So do it, and I'll talk to you again real soon. Till then, take care.